So he pulls the handle. First thing I remember, just like the first Top Gun movie, I remember hearing boom, and the canopy comes off, right, and blows off. So here we are. I'm wearing a flight suit, right? It's the first thing I feel is this wind blast of 20 below zero. And you're like, holy cow, right? And so I remember distinctly hearing boom, canopy goes off, blows off, and then I hear Gordo's seat go out. I remember seeing the flash from the rocket motor of his ejection seat, like, kind of ruined my night vision goggles. This whole sequence is like 1.7 seconds, but I remember all of this, right? So boom, head down, and now I'm forced looking down between my legs. I can see it right now, the red lights, the platform going away, and then I blacked out because you pull like 20 G's, and so if your head's in the good position, you're probably okay, but with your head down, all that blood's just rushing out of my head. So we ejected right around 20,000 feet. I wake up, I'm still in the seat, and I'm just in this free fall, falling in the middle of black night, right? Can't see anything. There's no horizon, there's no moon, there's no lights on the ground. I'm, close your eye, go to the top of the Empire State Building, close your eyes and jump down the elevator shaft. That's what I'm feeling, except it's 20 below zero, right? And so about the time I'm like, I can't take this anymore because I can't see anything. I'm going to die from this. So
Tower Empire Station is release you, runway 4 left, wind 040 at 5, clear for takeoff.
Seats high, altimeter 0 eyes, we're clear for takeoff, clear for the airspace. Viper check 2.
My burn rep curve was at 354. So yeah, that's on. Next picture 16, 15,000. I'll give you some of that.
Viper 1 target.
Awesome, sir. Thanks for joining me on the podcast.
yeah, and you don't have to call me sir. It's Vinny's fine. I'm good with that. I've been retired 5 years. Sir's my dad. So
Yeah. Well, how's the retirement piece going?
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, and that's how I know Soup is. We both work for Victory Strategies. I don't know if he talked to you about that at all. So it's like a leadership development coaching company. And it's funny because we got put into that separately. I'm obviously Navy guy. And then our first offsite together, I was brand new at the company. We're hanging out, just drinking cups of coffee and kind of telling war stories because, hey, it's Air Force guys, Navy guys, and we're talking. And we start talking about 2003, which I'm sure we'll talk about today. He was like, yeah, I was over in, F-14 guy, I was over in the KOC, in early war 2003. Yeah, there was a Tomcat that went down. I'm like, yeah, that was me. And he was like, holy cow, so it's funny. We hit it off right away. So yeah, Soup's one of my good friends now. I consider him that. So
That's really cool. I mean,
cool.
The fact of just how small the aviation world is, it's cliche to say, but I mean, I guess the longer you're in it, the smaller the world it gets, it seems.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, and another similar story to that is one of my, talk about worlds colliding. When I was in high school, I was a cabana boy at the U.S. Navy Officers Club down in Virginia Beach on the beach, and one of the guys that was working there, this guy named Jim Jordan, and he and I hit it off. He's a little bit older than me, so he had talked to me about going to the Air Force Academy. He ended up going to the Air Force Academy and was a Strike Eagle guy. So I'm sitting on the bus at Al-Udeid one day, riding over to the ops town and get on the bus, and Jim Jordan is sitting in the seat across the street, across the aisle from me. And I had no idea he was deployed over there, and there I was flying in a F-14. So just small world. I was like, holy cow, just crazy.
It is really cool to see just how it all collides. Sidebar, that might be the most Navy thing I've heard ever, the cabana boy at the ocean.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's on the beach. That's why I joined the Navy, not the Air Force, because it's on the beach, right? So,
yeah, I mean, I don't want to knock Sumter, South Carolina, or Alamogordo, New Mexico, just garden spots, but not as much water there. Alamogordo has a lot of white sand, though.
Yeah.
It's just no water to accompany it. Well, I'd kick it off. Dig back. What got you interested in flying? I see, obviously, your dad was in the Navy. I imagine that had something to do with it. But what spurred it?
Yeah, that's it right there. So I was actually born in Pensacola, Florida, while my dad was in flight school, and that's, as Navy folks know, that's the cradle of naval aviation is Pensacola, Florida. So I was born there, and then my dad and my mom took me all through flight school and all that. And then my dad ended up flying A-6s in the 70s and 80s, and he was stationed at Oceana his whole career too, pretty much. But as I grew up, seeing my dad do that, and then growing up in Virginia Beach, seeing the jets fly around, I just like, that's the coolest thing around. My mom loves to tell the story of, when I was 5 years old, going, hey, what do you want to do when you grow up? People, doctor, fireman, or whatever. And I was like, I'm going to be a fighter pilot. And it's funny. And I said that from the beginning. And it was always a dream of mine. So I was singularly focused, really going through high school and then college to do that. So, and it all worked out, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. And you didn't even need Top Gun to motivate you in that time period.
No.
I'm sure that helped.
Well, So I think it was 86. So I was 16. I was a junior in high school when Top Gun came out, but my mind was already made up at that point. And now I'm like, man, now everybody's going to want to do what I want to do. Makes it a little more competitive. But so I ended up getting a Navy ROTC scholarship to University of Virginia. Did that there. Studied aerospace engineering because if you want a ROTC scholarship, they want you to study technical stuff. So what I didn't realize after is you can say that to start, and then you don't have to finish your engineering degree. A lot of my friends did it for about a semester, and then they bailed. I stuck it out.
Good for you.
So just brutal. I have the battle scars to prove it. And then got into flight school, which was awesome. So I was pretty excited. Went right back to Pensacola, where I was born. So kind of cool, full circle there.
It's funny. I've told this story on the podcast for those who've listened. They can probably fast forward, but I was going to do engineering in ROTC because, again, same concept. Like, you need to be an engineer. That's the scholarship I had was a non-technical scholarship, which opened up the gates. And I had asked, like, hey, can I do anything? But the commander's like, no, you got to do civil engineering. That's what you said you were going to do when you did your interview. So, like, hands are I'm handcuffed here. But then, lo and behold, I show up to orientation day, and I run into a casual lieutenant who's waiting to go to pilot training. I'm like, hey, what do I need to do to be a pilot? It's like, you need to have a good GPA. I'm like, well, I didn't really enjoy calculus in high school. I'm not going to enjoy calculus at Georgia Tech, even though I still had to do it. But had I not switched to international affairs right out the gate, I don't know, maybe I'd have been a different path.
Smart man. Yeah, both my kids ended up going to UVA after. I met my wife there too, and I was like, don't go to engineering school. Do something else. Enjoy college.
Yeah. I enjoyed it. Now, if I got hit in the eye with a rock or something, then I don't know. I might be struggling to find a job with international affairs. Maybe not, but probably so. But who knows? So you go, obviously, I guess actually curious, that time period, so Top Gun does come out while you're in high school. It's everyone, I think, is surging. You got the Reagan years. What was that time period like? Going into the military, was it challenged to get a scholarship? I mean, what was the sentiment? All that.
I don't think it was too challenging to get a scholarship. I mean, that was it was late 80s, Reagan era. The Russians are still the bad guys. Now they are again. We've come full circle on that too. But the Russians were the bad guys. So we're building up. It was Reagan's 600 ship Navy. They're recruiting Top Guns out. It was full on. Let's go. Obviously, things changed after the Gulf War. I think you guys had similar programs in the Air Force where they're letting pilots go and doing all kinds of things. So it was a little bit difficult. But when I first joined, it was full up. And then kind of as I graduated, because I was in the engineering school, I went 5 years, but the Navy paid for it, which was awesome. Okay. But as I'm going through that, the pilot slots start shrinking. There's a backlog at flight school and all that. So when I graduated, I actually had to wait a year to even go to flight school. So they were kind of banking folks. I think the Air Force, you guys had similar type programs. So fortunately, because my dad was a Navy pilot, the commanding officer of the A6 training squadron here in Virginia Beach was one of his former students, and they had been squadron mates too. So he called up Bernie Satterwhite and was just, hey, Chad's graduating from UVA. He's got to find some place to go for a year. Could you take him at the training squadron, which was awesome because then I got exposed to some more naval aviation and, the carrier side, because there's obviously a lot more to naval aviation than just flying jets off aircraft carriers. But that's what they did. And fortuitously, they had T-34s there, which was the Navy's training airplane. And so they had about 6 T-34s that they used for just pilot currency and that kind of thing. And so I had the opportunity to fly some T-34s a little bit. So I got a little cheating in before I went down to flight school.
Awesome.
But, as fighter guys, we say, if you're not cheating, you're not trying.
Right.
So
That's
I cheated a little bit, and had some time in the T-34, which really helped me when I showed up at flight school. So I had a little bit of an edge there. Obviously, as you get more advanced and doing formation and stuff, none of that stuff matters. But maybe those first few flights, you kind of get that halo effect. Maybe we used to call it as a flight student. It's like, hey, this guy knows a little bit what's going on. So hopefully that helped out.
Well, I think too, it's like someone asked me the other day if I remember what it was like to start pilot training. And while I had my private pilot's license going into pilot training, it's nothing like walking onto the ramp at a military base with all the jets running, props turning, jet A, JPA, JPA5, depending on where you're at. Like, it's sensory overload. All the switches.
And plus the dynamic is different, and when you go to do civilian instruction, they're nice because they want you to come back and keep paying for it. Whereas in the military, it's like, oh, you want to join my club? Okay, we're going to start turning up the heat right away because military flying can be very stressful. And so, can you perform under that stress right away? So, it's a whole different program. I agree.
Yeah, it's not for the faint of heart, I don't think. It's changed. I think the Air Force, I'm sure the Navy's changed a bunch.
Yeah.
Even the, like I did casual status, what the Air Force called it, probably still calls it, where I waited about 15 months to go to pilot training. But they kicked me off to another base, a flying squadron. It was great exposure to be around, big Air Force. They stopped that program. I think maybe they trickle a couple out now, and I'm probably misquoting, but for a long time, I think maybe up till recently, you had to wait either a year to even get brought on to active duty, and then you went straight to a pilot training base. I was like, you kind of lose something in that.
Experience. Like I said, I was very fortunate that I was able to spend the same thing a year at Oceana with a training squadron before. So I kind of saw what the end game was. I'm like, okay, put up with all the games and all those things. I mean, rightly so, it's good training, but put up with those things because I can see at the end of the rainbow what's coming, right? And so you kind of know.
Yeah. Obviously, pilot training goes well for you. You end up in jets. I imagine the F-14 was probably the jet of choice in that day.
So interesting that I actually, my Tomcat brethren are going to look at me with a side eye when I say this, but I put Hornets down first. And some of it was I knew the Tomcat was kind of going away, and the Hornet was the newer airplane, and then we knew the Super Hornet was coming down the road. So I kind of thought, hey, I probably, most of the folks in my class put down F-18 to start, and it was the Legacy Hornet at the time, but it was the new fancy thing. Everything was, all the heads-up display and all that stuff, which the Tomcat really didn't have even when I first got there. But I was ecstatic to get F-14s. I was the only guy in my class that got them, so it was cool to get them. It was interesting, joined the Navy to see the world, and then at that point, Miramar had shut down, so all the F-14s were single-sided at Oceana, so I was going right back home, So yeah, my parents were ecstatic, and my wife's parents are from Virginia Beach as well, so we were going home, which was great for us to have family, especially as a Navy family. To have grandparents around, holy cow, And then I ended up doing my whole career at Oceana because I flew F-14s all the way through my department head tour, lieutenant commander, Navy major for the Air Force side, and then during that tour at the end we transitioned to Super Hornets, and then I was fortunate enough to command a Super Hornet squadron at Oceana. So my kids grew up going through one school system with their grandparents in town, and for a military family, that's very unique, I think. So pretty cool.
Well, obviously it's not common for even a fighter guy in the Navy to stay East Coast or West Coast. I mean, usually you're bouncing around between the coast and boats and stuff like that, right?
So, and I think what really facilitated that for me was the F-14 because it was single-sided here at Oceana. Yeah. So, I went through the training squadron, learned to fly the F-14, and then went to my first fleet squadron was VF-102, the Diamondbacks, and as soon as I finished the training squadron, I did one workup and then went right on my first deployment. So within 2 months of my joining the fleet, I was underway at sea on an aircraft carrier on my first deployment, which was pretty crazy. I did 2 deployments with the Diamondbacks, and then I was selected to go to Top Gun after that, and then became an East Coast weapons school instructor because that's where the Tomcats were at the time, and the weapons school was here at Oceana. And then flying with all the Tomcat squadrons on the flight lines as a weapons school instructor, I had all the quals, and then they need a training officer, so I had a couple of options. Different, commands were requesting me to come fly with them, so then I went and flew with another F-14 squadron here at Oceana. So I think that really facilitated me staying at Oceana for so long.
Yeah, that's a solid run, and obviously having all the family ties there definitely helps out.
Yeah.
Well, I want to dig into the deployments in the Tomcat, weapon school, etc. But first, you got to debunk the myth for me, because every time I make jokes about Top Gun or talk about it, it's just there's a lot of clicking noises every time. Tom Cruise as Maverick has zipped around the Tomcat. Does the Tomcat make all those clicking noises?
I'm deaf, so I probably didn't hear the clicking noises, but I'm deaf from flying the Tomcat. That thing was it was so loud. I loved flying the F-14, really did. And most folks, the guys that grew up flying F-18s, they always give the Tomcat community a hard time because, it's kind of like the old joke. How do you know there's a fighter pilot in the room? He'll tell you. It's kind of the same way with the F-14 guys. So we'll tell you it's on our watch, or we'll tell you we'll start talking about the F-14 at some point. So I love flying it. People ask me, sometimes, what do you like better, the Super Hornet or the Tomcat? And I, standard weapon school answer, it depends. What are we doing? Right. So if I'm flying in an air show, hands down Tomcat. That's the coolest airplane ever, I think. Just sexy, the wings, sweep. It goes super fast. It's loud. Awesome. But flying in combat, the Super Hornet, everything's just integrated, right? So when I was in the Tomcat, that's my first deployments, kind of when we first had the infrared pod, the FLIR, the lantern, and then we had night vision goggles. But when we flew night vision goggles, the cockpit wasn't built for that, so we basically would turn off all the lights in the cockpit because it would wash out your goggles. We had little finger lights on so that you could see, and then the technique was go get a bunch of that black electrical tape and put strips on the back of your helmet, so when the lights are leaking through, you could cover them up with the black tape. So I went from flying that to the Super Hornet that's got the joint helmet mounted cueing system, the HUD, everything's integrated, and you're just like, wow, this is pretty awesome. So
I should have Googled it, and I should know this, but last Tomcat flight was 2005, 2006 time frame.
The last Tomcat deployment was the Tomcatters of VF-31, 2005-6 time frame.
Okay.
Interestingly, I was the aide for the 4-star at U.S. Fleet Forces here in Norfolk, Virginia, which is right next to Virginia Beach at the time.
Okay.
And Admiral Nathman, he had been a Tomcat guy as well. So at the sunset ceremony for the Tomcat in 2006, he was the guest speaker for that. So I was there as his aide, watching the last Tomcat take off. I have a little tear in my eye. So yeah, pretty sad.
Yeah, a lot of hours, a lot of traps. We got to talk about that. But compare the Tomcat when you first started flying it after flight school to when it was sunsetted on the way out. What was it capability? Yeah,
completely different machine.
Okay.
It's amazing to me how fast the Navy adapted. I think it was lessons, learned from the first Gulf War. There were some air-to-air engagements and stuff, but really, the Tomcat mantra is probably like the Eagle drivers in the Air Force. They were like, we're air-to-air. That's what we do. That's all we do. There used to be a saying, what'd they say? Not a pound for air to ground. Basically, they didn't want to drop bombs, didn't want to do any of that, right? And that kind of thing. And then I think the community itself kind of realized, and the Navy at large, hey, we've got to do something, this A-18, right, fighter attack. So it's got to have some other capability to maintain its usefulness. So that's when the Lantern targeting pod first came on board. Was a little bit before I got there, but it was still fairly new. With that, so that gave us the capability to detect targets, but also guide laser-guided weapons, which was kind of a new thing, at least the precise ones, which was good. We started flying with night vision goggles, and I think the biggest change was there were 3 variants, the A, B, and D model. I flew the B predominantly, but my first deployment, the HUD was basically a nuisance. We would turn it off, honestly. I mean, it really there wasn't a velocity vector. There wasn't really anything in it. And you talk to F-18 guys, landing on the boat at night, no HUD that's an emergency. Whereas my first deployment in the F-14, coming in at night to land on the ship, I would turn off the HUD because the stuff just kind of got in the way and it wasn't really useful. And the Hornet guys were just like, what? So by my second deployment, we got a new HUD in the Tomcat, and it had all the things that you're used to: altitude, airspeed, velocity vector, all these things. And then, the ILS, all that stuff was in the HUD. So instead of, when I first was flying our shipborne ILS, or the automatic carrier landing system that you kind of look down, you had to look down between your knees at this little display, fly the ILS down there, and then at 3/4 of a mile at night, you would look up, see this little teeny, postage stamp in the dark bobbing out there, and try and land on it. And it was pretty sporty, especially even just, when you think about your eyes trying to transition from focusing on something short and then looking out long, whereas the HUD's focused at infinity. So my second deployment, we had heads-up display that was amazing, and then, and everybody asked me, when did you become a HUD cripple? I'm like, the second I rotated with a good HUD, the first time, so that's when I became a HUD cripple. And it was awesome. And in my first deployment, we had night vision goggles, but it was kind of a new thing, and so there was a very robust program to get trained up on doing it. And as I mentioned before, right out of the training squadron, I joined this squadron and went on deployment, so I didn't have time to get all that training. So, we're doing Operation Southern Watch sorties over Iraq, and we're doing this big air wing thing with 15, 16 airplanes, and I'm the only knucklehead not on goggles, flying in that. And now I look back on that now, I'm like, fortunately, I didn't know what I didn't know. So, but now I'm like, holy cow, I should have just been scared to death, which I was anyway. But I couldn't see anything to be scared, I guess, was the whole point. So kind of interesting. But yeah, Tomcat was a completely different machine from the time when I started to when I finished. We, it couldn't drop JDAM. The F-14D finally got JDAM towards the end. So, increased the weapon suite, and then the capability was pretty amazing.
Landing on the boat with no HUD, I'm assuming for the Navy, AOA, so angle of attack.
Yep.
And you're flying that down. But I'm thinking, F-16, no HUD. You still fly AOA for the F-16, but if you have no HUD, I still consider that an emergency.
Right.
Even though it's aim point airspeed, but the AOA tapes down between your legs. So the cross check there is not a very ergonomic cross check. Which it kind of sounds like that in the B model of the Tomcat.
We didn't have a HUD, but for the AOA check, at least the Navy, because we'd been landing on ships forever, and unlike the Air Force where you flare to land, our landing is actually a controlled crash. I mean, we fly at 750 feet per minute into the flight deck. So basically, you have to take the hook that's on the airplane and put it, and you try and target the 3-wire. So you're flying AOA and airspeed and glide slope so that you can plant the hook right in between the 2 and the 3-wire and do that and trap. And so, I mean, I'm going to use my hands here. You probably see it. Fighter guys always talk with their hands, right? So if this is me flying in the cockpit and then this is the hook down here, the reason we fly AOA is because if you change the AOA, we call it getting slow. So if you change the AOA, you can see the hook points moving, right? So and then if you're fast, the hook point's coming up. So even if you're on the correct glide slope, if you're not on the correct AOA and you're trying to put that hook point right in a specific spot on the flight deck to catch the wires, if you're fast, the hook's going to go over those wires, and if you're slow, it's dropping down. So you may hit the back of the ship or you may catch an early wire. So that's why AOA is critical for us. So even the days before the HUD, I talked to my dad about flying A6s to the boat. Basically, you would fly visually. So you're trying to, and the way we would say our scan is meatball, line up, angle of attack. So what the meatball is that's the Fresnel landing system that's on the side of the ship. And even with all this instrumentation, it's still there. So you basically have a row of green lights that's kind of the horizon. And then you have these yellow lights that are angled at different angles. And so as you're flying in, if you're on the correct glide slope, what we call the ball, the yellow light that you're seeing, it lines up with those green lights. That means that you're on the correct glide slope. So if you're high, the yellow light there will be canted up, and you'll see the ball basically above the datums is what we call them. And then if you're low, it's below it. And if you're really low, it's a red one. So that's the meatball. The next thing you have to fly is line up. And so you're basically trying to line up on the center line of the carrier. What most people don't think about is they think, oh, you just follow the wake in. Well, that's not correct, because the flight deck is angled 10 degrees off the center line. And we did that after World War II with the jets and everything, because as you land the airplane, then they'll taxi you over to the front out of the landing area. In the old days of World War II, straight deck carrier, if you miss the wires, you plow into the airplanes on the front of the ship that have already landed in there in front of you. So it's angled off 10 degrees. So, if you're looking at the carrier, and this is, my fingers are the carrier flowing, and then my thumb is kind of the flight deck, it's moving away. So you have a built-in, basically for the aviators out there, think of it as a built-in crosswind already, right? So you've got to put in a little crab to get in there and land on the center line of the ship as it's moving away. And also don't forget that we're out in the middle of the ocean, so the ship's bobbing up and down. So you got that going on as well. And then there's limited flight deck on the aircraft carrier room, so the airplanes are, we call it the foul line, parked right on the edge of the landing area. So if you don't land right on center line, especially at Tomcat, we had a 60-foot wingspan. Your wingtips could easily hit some of those other airplanes that are going on there. So your scan is meatball, line up, and then it's angle of attack, as we were talking about. And so kind of a unique thing that the Navy came up with is right on the side of the HUD, and it used to be just a glare shield because they didn't have HUDs, but even still on the Super Hornet you have it. We call them the indexers. And so you don't have to really look at it. There's basically 3 lights there. So the top one is a green chevron that kind of points down, and if it's green, that means you're slow, so you kind of push your nose down. In the middle is a yellow donut, and so if you see the yellow donut, that means you're on speed. And then if you see red, that means your chevron means you're a little fast. Your angle of attack is too low, so you're going to need to get your nose up a little bit as you do that. So your scan is meatball, lineup, angle of attack, but you can really see that kind of angle of attack out of your periphery. So if you just see that little yellow glow kind of in your peripheral vision, you're scanning the other 2 things. And then if that color changes, you'll see it change as you're coming in.
I guess the Air Force did steal that, at least for the Viper, and then the T6A, the joint one, being able to use it. But the tape where it gets refined down there, you got to look.
Yep.
Between.
Yeah. And in the Super Hornet too, you can pull it up on your one of your displays. You can pull up the actual angle of attack. But obviously during flying, when we're flying to the ship, you're looking out the window, doing those things.
I was thinking too. I mean, the canted deck. To me, I would think that would create a visual illusion that you would constantly be fighting, just like being on the tanker in the weather, thinking you're in a bank. Like, to me, I mean, I would feel like I would have some battle.
So you basically kind of just building in it's not like the old wing down top rudder slide in there. It's just kind of you offset the heading, basically, is what you try and do. So you're just kind of crabbing in there as you're coming in. And then, when you get to the Super Hornet, with the HUD, and you got a very accurate velocity vector because the mission computers and all that stuff are really accurate, and especially for the younger kids now flying all the video games and that kind of thing, you learn that we call it putting the velocity vector in the crotch. So basically in between where the ship is and the angle is, we call that the crotch, where the angle is, where the bow goes out. So if you're kind of flying in visually, one of the tricks was if you put the velocity vector kind of right in that crotch, it kind of gave you that perfect little crab, and you could just tweak it right at the end. But generally, that's kind of how we do it. And then now there's a system called Magic Carpet where the airplane couples up to the ship, and the computers fly it in, which is pretty awesome. You still have to know how to do it manually, but hey, it would have been really nice after some of those 8-10 hour combat missions to not come back at night and have to fly to the boat. You can just hook it up and land, which would be pretty nice.
That'd be glorious. I mean, you only had to do it like 600 plus times. So
yeah, and a lot of those at night. Probably half of them at night, because most of the combat flying I did was at night. So yeah, crazy.
Well, interesting too. Thinking just what is available today, and if you're going out there flying at night with data link, obviously NVGs. But if you're doing a large force exercise, or if you're crossing the line in a bad guy land, there's a lot of planes, a lot of people flying around. If you're going out there with 16 jets, assuming VFR at night, using like air-to-air TACANs, maybe that's tied up. But
yeah, and in the one of the interesting systems that the Tomcat had way before anybody else was the early version. We called it fighter to fighter. So we couldn't see the other airplanes in the air wing, but we could see each other on the data link. So that that was kind of I think the precursor to JTIDs and all those kind of things. So it was really kind of the first link system, which was really nice to have. But yeah, I could see the other Tomcats, but I couldn't see anybody else.
At least it's a little bit of
yeah.
help.
Yeah.
Well, talk to me about those first deployments. What were those like? And you mentioned Operation Southern Watch, but what was a day in the life of? How busy was it?
It was busy. That was kind of the back of the day of the no-fly zone. With the hey, don't cross this line. First deployment, I was just a very young guy, wingman out there flying. So I spent most of my time, looking for lead and not losing sight, because that's when you get, as a wingman, you get yelled at. So especially as a young fighter guy in the Tomcat community, pride ourselves on flying formation and don't lose sight, right? And
yep.
I mean, we had set up some things where we were, the dream was, hey, a MiG-25 comes screaming out of Baghdad and they're going to test the line. And it was like, well, back then, we had the Phoenix missile, which was this, way long range thing designed to shoot down Soviet bombers, really. But we had adapted our tactics to shooting down fighters. So that was the dream shot, was to get the MiG-25. And so that was the big thing in the ready room, was always, hey, are the MiG-25s flying? You think we're going to have one today? And it kind of kept your juices going. So you just didn't go, it's monotonous. I'm going to go drill holes in the sky and tank again and come back to the boat. We still had an air-to-ground mission at that time, but there wasn't a whole lot going on. It was more, that was really for the first two deployments. It was like, hey, if a SAM system came up or they were moving stuff down south, maybe, the whole deployment dropped one or two bombs and the whole air wing. So it wasn't too much for that. So that was really my first two deployments, was kind of Operation Southern Watch. Just, flying live weapons, which was really exciting for a young pilot, carrying those things and all the stuff that comes with that. But, and then really building a lot of it was the camaraderie with all the guys in the ready room, and the 6 guys you lived with in your bunk room, was pretty awesome, and so you build those lifetime bonds and relationships with those guys. And we were pulling into port at that point about once a month. So going into Dubai or Bahrain and blowing off a little bit of steam and doing some team building and those kind of things, which was awesome. I'm sure you're familiar with. Although as an Air Force guy, you guys usually stayed in nice hotels at nice places, unlike us. So
well, it's a trade-off. It depends on I guess the deployment, everyone's miserable. At least in today's time in the Air Force, you probably have Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Again, the Navy, that's...
Yeah. Even still, my last deployment I did flying Super Hornets. I was the executive officer squadron, was 2009-10 time frame. And we still had on the carrier, we called it the sailor phone, which was awesome because I didn't have that. My first deployment, we didn't even have email, so we were still writing snail mail. You write something home and it got there in about 8 days, which was just like blows your mind now you think about it,
Yeah.
And then, after that email comes along, and then we had the capability for a sailor phone where you could, get this AT&T card and call home at $1 a minute or whatever. And then even my last deployment, 2009-10, as the XO of the squadron, I got sent to the KOC. So I'm living at Al-Udeid in the KOC, and I was like, holy cow, I can, Skype home and actually see my family. Like, what is this thing? So it's completely different. In the Navy, we're just not used to that. We're going to be out at sea doing things, and then sometimes that stuff gets shut down, basically what's going on. And so you're just out in the middle of the ocean, living with your peeps out there, hoping for the snail mail to come, every once in a while, every 10 days or so.
That's why I think the happiest person at the KOC is the Navy L&O who's
Yep.
off the boat. Like, I got Wi-Fi, 3 beers a day, like my own room,
exactly.
like life's great.
I can have a beer? What?
Yeah, it's like
I can get on the bench press without worried about the weights going over to the side, huh? Well, this is good. I love this.
Things I never had to worry
You
about.
don't even think about.
Yeah.
Right.
That would be a problem. Not getting to work out today. Get thrown off the treadmill.
Yeah. Gym's closed. Sea state's too high. What? Oh, okay. Yeah.
In the Air Force, we don't fly if the sea state's too high, so don't have to worry about working out.
Yeah, we don't that's not a thing in the Navy. And we fly over the water. That's what we do.
Yeah. Everyone's got their strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
It's all about life choices.
You guys are the smart ones. Don't fly over rough sea states. Deploy off the beach somewhere. It's pretty nice.
Where you look down, like now, like crossing the ocean with my day job, or whatever, just pure, like look down, like some of the waves. You're like, if you had to punch out and you're riding your dinghy, it's not gonna be a great day.
No, not gonna be fun. I mean, my last deployment, we were off in the Indian Ocean, flying into Afghanistan, and the sea state, and they call it the summer monsoon season, and I mean just huge waves, and the biggest I've ever seen. I always deployed off the East Coast, so the guys that go off the West Coast, they'll tell you guys don't know anything about sea states on the East Coast, and generally they're right. They're off the coast of Australia or Hawaii. You talk about the big sea states that they see out there in the Pacific. Holy cow! But I did one of our deployments. We went up, did a big exercise off the coast of Scotland in October, and we had like 40-foot seas. So I mean, an aircraft carrier is huge, and generally it doesn't move that much. It was moving off the coast of Scotland. So, we're out there. If you're inside the ship, you could feel the ship go up, and then it would hit this wave, and the whole ship would just go and shudder as we're going through. And then, we're sitting in the ready room getting ready to brief, and you feel the ship going boom. You're like, oh boy, this is going to be sporty, and you go up on the flight deck, and you're hitting those 40-foot waves, and there's spray coming over the front of the ship, and you're just like, oh man. And and then you get manned up, you get on the airplane, and then they put you up. You're going up to the the Cat 1 or Cat 2 up on the bow of the ship, and so they put you in what we call tension. So usually as they're getting ready to launch off the carrier, your nose is hooked into your launch bar is on the nose wheel, and it's hooked into the catapult system. And they actually you'll see the shooter do this signal like this. I can show you, but they call putting in tension, right? So now there's tension on that thing, on the catapult, and you go full power, and that's where you do your wipeout. And usually you go full power, you do your wipeout. The troubleshooters are around the jet looking. If everything's good, they'll give the shooter a thumbs up, and then the shooter reaches down and touches the flight deck, and boom, you go off. And you're not in tension that long. But in this case, we're sitting there off the coast of Scotland, 40-foot seas, water coming over the bow, and the ship's moving so much and the sea state's so big that they'll put you in tension, but you're looking at a wave. Like the nose is down of the ship, you're looking into the wave. So they're waiting until you hit the wave and the ship starts to point up, and then they shoot you off the front. And you're like, well, I hope they get this thing right, because otherwise they shoot you right into the face of this 40-foot giant wave coming down. And so you're like, whew, survive that. And then you come around, and then you got to land on the boat when it's moving that much, and so at that point, I talked a little bit about earlier about you got the, we call the Fresnel lens, where you're looking at the glide slope as you're coming down. And that's all gyro stabilized, and it's made for sea states. But when the sea state gets that big, it's not, the gyros just can't keep up. And so what they do is they call it moveless. And the landing signal officers, and there's always some out there to make sure you're flying safe and landing. If your pass doesn't look right, they'll wave you off, or they'll give you a little sugar call. We call it, hey, if you're a little low, they'll be like power, or right for lineup. They'll give you little sugar calls in there to make sure you're landing okay. But they're out there manually with this. I mean, this is World War II stuff with this lever, and then they're moving that ball up and down based on what they're seeing on the trend, because the aft end of the ship is moving so much, they can't really tell. So they're just kind of looking where you are in the sky and going, I think you're a little high, or you're a little low, and then you're making those corrections. And then they're also looking at the timing of the deck. So if the deck's coming up and you're coming down, they'll wave you off, because, I mean, you've seen the difference between Air Force and Navy landing gear, right? Ours is super robust because you're landing at 750 feet per minute. That's the target. You might land harder than that. But if the deck's coming up from the sea state and then you're coming down at that 750, you can just really damage the airplane. So they'll just tell you, deck's up, wave off. It's not your fault. It's not a technique. You just got to go around and try it again. And generally, we only have enough gas to do, 2, maybe 3 passes, and then you got to hit the tanker. Organic, usually tanker overhead the boat, and then come back down and try it again. So yeah, that was sporty. That was the biggest I'd seen. I talked to some of my friends off the doing the Westpacks, and they talk about landing on the boat, big sea states where you're seeing, there's four screws on the aircraft carrier. You're seeing the aft set as that tail end of the ship's coming up as you're trying to land. You're seeing the tops of the aft screws come out of the water. I'm like, oh man, that's not where you want to be. That's not where you want to be.
Time to divert. Oh wait, there's nowhere to go.
Yeah, nowhere to go.
Oh, that's terrible.
Unless you want to eject into that sea state, which you don't. So yeah, your shower and your rack and the food are on the boat. So I'm going to land on the boat. That's where you're trying to get back to.
No plan B.
No.
On that note, so that sounds like that's probably in the top 5 scariest landings for you.
Yep.
But would you have one landing or cat shot or mission in particular that stands out to you that was like, whew, that was spicy?
Yeah, I have my story, and now's probably a good time to tell it. Is probably this is my I've listened to 17 stories in the O Club, and I'm 4 beers in now, so I'm gonna one up you with this one. This is my one up you story. So in 2003, during Operation Iraqi Freedom, was probably about the 10th day of the war. You probably remember all the news talking about all the shock and awe and all that stuff going on. So I'm flying. I was a weapons school instructor at the time, qualified as a forward air controller, airborne. And so we figured there's going to be a lot of close air support going on during that, and there was. And so I was deployed out of weapons school, so I was on shore duty and got sent over to augment a squadron, VF-154, the Black Knights, flying F-14As, the oldest Tomcats in the Navy at the time, flying those as a forward air controller with the Black Knights. So we are downtown Baghdad. I'm the wingman at this point. The commanding officer, Flats Flatley, he's the skipper of the squadron. I'm his wingman. He's actually flying. His Rio is a guy named Tuffy Braun, who was my crewmate going through Top Gun. So talk about another small world. So Tuffy is a department head in the Black Knights. He's flying with Flats. And then I'm flying with another FAC A who I had been a junior officer with in the Diamondbacks in my first deployment. He's senior to me, but he's department head, also forward air controller. And so the 4 of us are flying around downtown Baghdad, doing some helicopter escort, doing some forward air control. This was right, remember all the shock and awe. You can see the stuff on CNN, all the AAA and all that stuff coming up. So pretty crazy being downtown Baghdad, especially on night vision goggles, flying in there. The city was all lit up. You can imagine what that looked like. And then you're seeing, most of the SAMs were unguided, but you're seeing SAMs come up, and it looks like the space shuttle coming off when you're looking at it on goggles. And then the AAA going everywhere. And then, of course, over the top of us, you've got all the harm coming down and all those kind of different things. So you're just seeing everything going on. I was like, holy cow. I mean, at some points in the night, it got so much, I just flipped up my goggles because, I was like, I'm going to go back to, young Lieutenant Vinny flying the F-14 and take my goggles off because I don't want to see the ignorance is bliss, right? I just don't want to see all this stuff going on. But we're doing our mission there, doing all kinds of stuff. As we're coming back, we were kind of cycling off and on the tanker just so we had a continuous presence over the target that we were doing. So Gordo and I are low on fuel, heading over to the tanker area. We're flying over I didn't know the name of the town at the time, but obviously big battle there later is Fallujah, right? So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on down in Fallujah, AAA, all kinds of stuff going on. We cross over Fallujah, and then our left engine shuts down. And in the Tomcat, that's a big deal because we have, different hydraulic systems. Most, military airplanes do have redundant systems and all that kind of stuff. But in the Tomcat, the left side was basically what we call the combined side hydraulics. So that's the one that ran all the big stuff, the brakes and all those kind of things that you needed. Now, the other hydraulic systems would work, and we had emergency brakes, and obviously as a Navy guys, we had tail hook and that kind of thing. But without having brakes and all that, we're like, holy cow, we lost our combined side hydraulics here as we're flying. So we lose that left engine. Trying to relight it. It wouldn't relight. Tomcats at the time were having pretty serious fuel transfer issues, just some degradation from the age of the airplanes. I was flying the oldest Tomcat in the Navy at the time. And so that whole engine shuts down. It wasn't the first time I'd lost an engine flying an F-14A. At the time we were flying, the A had these Pratt & Whitney engines, and so very old, kind of 70s, early 80s technology. And so if you were rough with them, shuttling between afterburner and mill and idle, they had a tendency to stall. So it wasn't the first time I'd lost one of those engines. So I was like, okay, we lost an engine. We'll probably get this thing relit. They generally did. It wasn't a problem. But we didn't know why, and it wouldn't relight. So we're thinking, okay, we're pretty low on fuel. We're still going to try and rendezvous on the tanker. Listen to some of your other podcasts, like Colonel Soup Campbell talking about the A-10 being underpowered and trying to tank on the tanker at 26,000 feet in a hog, loaded up. It's not going to work. Well, F-14A, older engines, tanking at 26,000 feet is not going to work either. So we talked to the tanker, brought them down, and even the F-14A was so underpowered that even with a full combat load at altitude trying to tank, our technique was we had to put one engine in afterburner and then modulate the other one, just to stay. Navy's different. We do the drogue in the basket, so to keep the probe into the basket, you had to modulate one when you're on afterburner. So it's not really fuel efficient when you're taking fuel at a certain rate and then the other engine's burning it at almost the same rate. You're like, what do we do? It's almost negative, right? I'm burning more gas on the tanker here than I'm getting. But single engine couldn't really. The tanker came down in altitude. God bless them, those guys, for doing that. We rendezvous on those guys. Try and get in the basket. Just can't. I can get in. Using the geometry, we get them flying a circle, so I'm on the inside of the circle, so I can use the geometry to get in, get the probe in the basket, but then I just can't stay in the basket. I keep falling out, and with one engine, if I put that one in afterburner, I can't really modulate it because it's so much power. I really need the other one to do it, but the other one's shut down. So now we're kind of in a quandary. So we're like, hey, we're not going to make it back to the boat. We're going to divert. So we're going to just try and get somewhere in good guy country. And we were pretty far up north, just outside of Baghdad, doing this tanker drill. So we were looking at the fuel. We should have had enough fuel to make the single engine bingo if all the systems had worked correctly. So I'm focusing on trying to tank. In the Tomcat, you talked about the AOA tapes in the F-16. It was similar in the Tomcat. We had fuel tapes. It was mechanical, really. Hard to believe that. These fuel tapes that were in the front seat. I've been in the B1. I've looked at the wing sweep tapes and some of the stuff, and a lot of the stuff's very similar in the Tomcat, which I found kind of interesting. But
that's what Goose is tapping in the movie, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Tapping the fuel gauge, right? Yeah. So we're looking at. He's got in all Gordo has got in the back is a totalizer, so he's seeing we got 3,000 pounds of gas. In the front seat, it's the pilot's job to say, hey, we've got a fuel split or whatever, because I have a totalizer, but I have the tapes. He doesn't have that in the back seat. I'm so focused on trying to get in this tanker and rendezvous and fly all that. I'm not looking at the tapes. I can just kind of see the totalizer in my periphery. It's not going up. We're not really getting gas. We decide we're going to divert, pull off the tanker, and this is the first time I look down at the tapes, and I'm like, that left side had a lot more fuel. I think it was over 2,000 pounds that are in there, and then the right side had about 1,000 pounds. So right then, our low fuel light comes in on the right side. Now, when you lose an engine, the fuel's supposed to transfer over automatically, and then it didn't. And I think it was probably because some of those fuel transfer issues the Tomcat was having. So now we're like, holy cow. So we had enough gas total, in theory, to make it to the divert. But now we don't. If we're just running on one engine, especially single engine, bingo. And it was, over 100 miles that we were trying to go. Fortunately, we were already at altitude. So we're flying down to the south, figuring out this divert airfield we're going to go to. It's kind of an expeditionary airfield out in Saudi Arabia. So we're trying just to get across the border from Iraq into there. So we're counting down the fuel. The low fuel light comes on. There was kind of a fail-safe system that you read about in our we call it our NATOPS. It's basically our technical manual on a Tomcat. That hey, at the very end, there's kind of like just this gravity feed suction thing. It'll get down to this one little pipe at the end, and it'll pull the fuel over. And we're like, okay, hoping that works, right? And so we're flying along, and I'm just counting down the fuel to Gordo. I mean, and I can remember this distinctly. I'm like, hey, there's 600 pounds. there's 500 pounds, which in a fighter is nothing for
Yeah.
fuel. That's 100 gallons, right? That we're flying. And Flats and Tuffy are our wingmen flying along with us, doing an escort here as we're going, trying to fly. And then in our tech pub manual, the NATOPS, it says the fuel gauge is accurate, plus or minus 300 pounds.
I was going to say most jets like 400 pounds plus or minus is
plus or minus 300 pounds. So we validated that because I'm counting down. There's 400, there's 300. Right engine flames out. I'm like, holy crap. And so, I mean, this is the exact conversation that Gordo and I have. He said, is that it? I'm like, yep, that's it. And so at that point, we're just running. It's basically emergency lights come on, red lights in the cockpit. That's it. That's all we've got. Gordo's a bigger guy. We had some problems in the Tomcat, with if it's out of the ejection envelope, that when you eject, you can maybe hit the tails, the vertical tails, and Tomcat were so big, some of the guys may have hit those. It's kind of some of the things they thought. So we're like, hey, we got to keep this thing in the ejection envelope. People ask us all the time, could you glide the thing? I'm like, glide it to where? It glides like a rock, and then what I'm going to do, land in the desert? So it's like, hey, we might as well be settled in a good ejection envelope, and so part of the protocol, I'm sure it's probably the same for you guys, is if you're going to eject, at least in a two-seat airplane, the reel will say goggles, eject, so you don't have that moment arm sitting on the front of your head. And it's probably part of your practice, I would think, if you have time to take those things off. So I have, at this point, because I was tanking, we don't tank on the goggles, I had the goggles flipped up, so I couldn't even see them really in my peripheral vision. They're flipped up here. Gordo's on the radio, tells Flats and Tuffy's like, hey, that's it, we're out of here. And so he calls goggles, eject. Now, some that, I haven't told too many people this is, we were flying these, 8-10 hour missions, flying all night in an ejection seat. I was flying the old one as a Gru 7, and even in the Super Hornet, the new ejection seat. The seat pad is not really a seat pad, and it's probably the same in the Viper, because if you eject and you have this big cushion there, you get what's called seat slap, right? So the bottom of the seat hits your legs, and you can break both your legs, right? So, but we had been flying all these missions, and I could barely get out of the airplane at the end because I was just so sore. So I'm like, you know what? All right. So I went down and I found this old chair that was sitting around the ready room, and I cut the seat cushion out of it. And so when I was flying, I had that thing, and I would stuff it under, and I would sit on that thing. And you talk about, serendipity or whatever, as I'm loading the airplane that night, the plane captain sees me carrying the seat cushion. He's like, what are you doing with that thing? I'm like, I'm going to sit on it. He's like, if you eject with that thing, it's going to break your legs. I'm like, what are the chances of that happening, right? So here we are flying along I'm on the tanker. We see the fuel going down, and the writing is on the wall. This is going bad. So fortunately, I had the forethought to go, I got to get rid of this seat cushion. So no kidding.
Wow. As
we're thinking of these things, I'm like loosening up my seat belts, reach down between my legs. I take the seat cushion out. I shoved it up in the HUD because this was the old F-14A HUD. It didn't matter anyway. So I just shoved it up in the front glass, sit back down, cinch down. And then within 10 seconds, Gordo's like, goggles, eject. And I'm just like, holy crap, right? So this is the middle of the night. It's April 1st, 2003, so about the 10th day of the war. We are 70 miles north of the border of Iraq and Saudi Arabia. And so we're basically behind enemy lines at this point. And so he calls eject. And then, you hear about, all this time dilation and all those kind of things, like car wreck, right? Everything's just slows down. You can think of everything, right? That whole ejection sequence, I think, takes like 1.7 seconds or something like that. It seemed, even now when I think about it, it's like 10 minutes long, that whole thing, right? So he calls eject. We're at 20,000 feet in the middle of the night in April, and there's no moon. It's just dark. Can't see anything. It's the western desert of Iraq, so it's an ink bottle that we're flying in. At that point, my job as the pilot, I've just been flying the airplane, right? So I slow down the airplane as much as I can. We get down to like 200 knots, which as a fighter guy, that's way slow, especially in combat. Normally you're flying around 350, 400 knots all the time, right? Just so you have ability to maneuver if you need to. So I slowed us down about 200 knots. Gordo pulls the ejection handle. So I'm flying. He calls eject, eject, eject. I let go of the throttles and the stick, and then just grab right here onto my torso harness, and I tilt my head back, and of course my goggles are still right there, and I'm like, oh crap. So I'm doing this, because as a pilot, your instinct is just to fly the airplane, and that's my job. And so in a two-seat airplane, in general, what we've seen in the Navy, in the two-seat airplanes at least, the ejection is command eject. So either crew member pulls the ejection seat, you both go out. And that's because if you hit a bird or something, pilot's incapacitated, the Rio or the Wizzo, now for the Super Hornet, can get you out. So Gordo pulls the ejection handle, and that's pretty typical. Pilots usually flying the airplane, and then the Wizzo or the Rio is going to pull the ejection handle. So he pulls the handle. First thing I remember, just like the first Top Gun movie, I remember hearing boom, and the canopy comes off, right, and blows off. So here we are. I'm wearing a flight suit, right? We're at 20,000 feet in the middle of the night in Iraq. It's like 20 below zero out there, right? Yeah. So the first thing I feel is this wind blast of 20 below zero, and you're like, holy cow, right? And so I remember distinctly hearing boom, canopy goes off, blows off. And then I hear Gordo's seat go out, and the way the Tomcat was mechanized, because we sit fore and aft in the cockpit, just so the seats don't hit each other, the Rio's going to go first, and he's got a little bit of a right cant, so boom, he goes out to the right, and then the pilot's going to go out to the left. So boom, Gordo goes out. I remember seeing the flash from the rocket motor of his ejection seat, kind of ruined my night vision goggles. Remember, like I said, this whole sequence is like 1.7 seconds, but I remember all of this, right? And so then I'm here waiting, and then boom, I go. And because I had my goggles up here on my forehead, my head tilts down. So you want to be in a good ejection position, right? So that your spinal cord doesn't get compressed too much. You're not going to get a neck injury and everything. Yeah, so much for that. So boom, head down, and now I'm forced looking down between my legs. And I mean, if I close my eyes right now, I can see it. I'm looking down between my legs. I can see the planform of the Tomcat going away and the red lights in the cockpit. So I'm just looking down. I can see it right now, the red lights, the planform going away, and then I blacked out because you pull like 20 G's. And so if your head's in the good position, you're probably okay. But with your head down, all that blood's just rushing out of my head. And so I blacked out at this point. Unconscious, out. And then I wake up. And so the way the seat's mechanized is, I'm sure your seats are probably the same, is, so you don't freeze to death or suffocate. If you eject at 20,000 feet or wherever, the parachute doesn't open till 11,500 feet, plus or minus 1,500 feet. So somewhere in there. So we ejected right around 20,000 feet. I wake up, I'm still in the seat, and I'm just in this free fall, falling in the middle of black night. Right? Can't see anything. There's no horizon. There's no moon. There's no lights on the ground. Close your eye. Go to the top of the Empire State Building. Close your eyes and jump down the elevator shaft. That's what I'm feeling, except it's 20 below zero, right? And so oxygen mask is still on, but I don't have a visor on because we were wearing goggles. Goggles are gone from the blast. I lost my knee board. All that stuff, that's all gone. And I'm just free falling in this seat. And about the time I'm like, I can't take this anymore because I can't see anything. I'm going to die from this. So we had the ability in the Gru 7, you could manually seat man separate. So you had to basically pull a little right handle on the right side of your seat, and then you pull the D-ring and the parachute would open, because the way it works is the parachute's in the head box of the ejection seat, and there's a barrel altimeter in there basically, and when it senses 11,000 feet plus or minus 1,500, boom, it pops the parachute out, right? And that's how that works. And then basically an airbag in the back of your seat blows you out. So I'm sitting there thinking, this is my conscious thought as I'm going down. I'm like, I'm going to die, I think I'm going to hit the ground going this hard. And right then, boom, our jet hits the ground. So fortunately for us, we'd already dropped all our bombs, which was good. But that fuel that was trapped in that left side caught on fire. So boom, I got this fireball. When I talked to Gordo about it, he said he's looking down and sees this, and he's like, hey, somebody's dropping bombs out here, is what his thought was. And my thought was, holy cow, that's the airplane just hit, right? And so I am no kidding getting ready to manually seat Vincelette. And then, boom, the barrel altimeter kicks in. Boom, airbag hits me. Toosh, kicks me right out of the seat, and then, whew, chute opens. Opening shock, right? So you're screaming as you're coming down. And as you know, our parachute, it's not like the SEAL teams or the special forces in these little square chutes where you can steer that thing and it's all kind of Gucci. This is just a round parachute designed to keep you alive, right? And so here it goes. Boom, chute opens up. And then once again, it felt like a Mike Tyson punch. I was like, bam, holy cow. I was kind of rung my bell again. A little unconscious, seeing stars a little bit. I'm like, God, that's twice, unconscious in this event already. And then, when you go through all the parachute training and all that stuff, we do it like every 4 years in the Navy. I'm not sure how long it is in the Air Force, right? And so you go through and you get all these things, and like the first thing you check is, check your chute, and so our acronym is IROC, right? Inspect, inflate, raft, because we're Navy guys, right? Options, pull off your gloves, do these things, and then your Coke fittings is what you want to do, because if you're going to, hit in the water, you want to make sure you pop those things off. And so first thing, I was like, I haven't done this training. It's been probably 3.5 years. I'm not going to remember any of this stuff. Man, when you go to lizard brain, that stuff kicks in. And so, boom, inspect. I look up, and there's the canopy, right? And so the military canopy's got, it's got a white panel, it's got an orange panel, and a green panel. And the white and orange is, signaling device you can use if you're out on the ground somewhere in the water. You can use it. Your rescuers can see you, and then that ground is kind of, hey, if you need to build shelter, it's camouflage or whatever, right? So first thing I do is inspect a chute, right? So look up, and guess what? The white panel's just up there fluttering. And I'm like, oh my God, right? My bad night just got really bad, because unlike, the 82nd Airborne or the Special Forces, we don't carry a spare. You got one shot. This is it, right? So from that training I got, and God bless, the folks that give us that training, all these things. So I'm trying all this stuff. I'm thinking, hey, maybe I got a line over. All the tricks, right? So I'm going to try and bounce this line off. Yep. I'm going to pull on one of the risers. I'm going to do the bicycle kick. I'm thinking all this stuff going through. So I'm trying to do all that. It's black. I can't really see everything. I don't even know if the white, or if the greenish panel is even inflated. I might have a streamer. I can't tell. All I can see, because I lost all my night vision from when Gordo's seat went off, right? So boom, I'm blinded. All I can see as my night vision is coming back is that white panel just up there fluttering. And so I'm just in a panic, honestly, trying to fix all this stuff. And then finally, kind of the night vision starts to come back as I'm just screaming downhill. I can see that orange panel. I can see the brown panel. The white one's fluttering. I honestly think, I probably had enough adrenaline. I could have just pulled on the risers and pulled the line over off, climbed up there and done it. So, one of our options is 4-line release, so you can steer this thing, right? So you want to steer into the wind, because if you remember back then, seeing the pictures on CNN and Fox and, all the coverage of these big sandstorms and all that stuff. And my only vision in my mind was, here I have this, parachute, and I'm going to land, and I'm going to be like the old Western, get drugged behind this parachute going across the desert. So I'm thinking, I got to fix this thing. You want to steer into the wind so you can prevent some of that stuff from going on. But now that I have this line over, I'm like, I'm not going to pop that 4-line release to steer, because I don't know how many good lines I got anyway, and I don't want to cut 8 of them, and now what do I have? So I'm thinking, holy cow. And so, yeah, my serious conscious thought was, I'm going to die. This is going to kill me. So then I start going, what are the other options I have? Fortunately, as a Navy pilot, we fly with our life jackets on all the time. So we have them. So, think about if you have any listeners that go out and go fishing, and they have the little low profile one that's kind of around their neck, right? You fall in the water, you can inflate that thing. I had the old style one that we used to fly, so it had one around the neck, and then it had some kind of big bladders around the waist, but it's all included in our survival vest. So I'm thinking, normally over land we wouldn't inflate that thing, because you don't want to get hung up in trees and all kinds of stuff. I don't know what possessed me at the time, but I was just like, airbag. So I inflated that thing. Comes up around my neck and then around my waist. And so at this point, I'm like, okay, I got a good orange panel. I got a good brown one. the white one's still shot. I'm coming down pretty hard. I think I'll probably survive this. I mean, it was a conscious thought, but I'm going to break my legs and probably my back. And so I'm coming down. And so as I'm coming down, because of the air's leaking out of that orange panel, I'm kind of doing slow spirals as I'm coming down. And now I have at least one light source. It's not good. You don't have any depth perception with that, but the airplane's burning over here off in the distance, so at least I can see something. And so if you think about it, you get in your living room, turn off all the lights, and put a birthday candle over in the corner. And that's about what I had, right? So I got this little teeny fire that's burning over there, and I'm looking at that, and I'm doing kind of slow circles. And as I perceive that's getting closer to the horizon, I'm trying to think, okay, just relax. If you relax, you're going to hit the ground, do your parachute landing fall. If you're relaxed, you're not stiff, your muscles will be good, your legs will give, and then you'll be fine. And so I'm thinking about the sandstorm. I got my hands on my Coke fittings. I'm going to pop the parachute off as soon as I land. So I'm doing these slow circles, and then I wake up, and I'm like, where am I? I have no idea what's going on. I mean, I got my bell rung so hard, and this is the third time I'm unconscious in the last 10 minutes, right? But this time was the real bell ringer. So I'm like, I don't even know what's going on. I'm like, I look down, I'm like, I'm laying on the ground. I'm like, I'm laying in the desert. I'm in a flight suit. I had popped my Coke fittings. I don't know. I did it, I guess, when I hit. I don't even remember doing that because my parachute was kind of laying away from me. I'm like, that's a parachute. I'm laying in the desert. I'm like, huh. And then it starts to come back, right? So, holy cow. I must have ejected, right? And then, so the first thing I do is, back then we had the old Prick 112 Bravo survival radio. Remember that? And so I can remember sitting in the ready room training, and there's on the front, there's steps. It says, step 1, turn the radio on. Step 2, put the antenna up. And you're like, why would they put that on there? After you've been knocked unconscious 3 times, you're like, what I did is I basically went and got my parachute, put it over me, so I had the brown part on the outside, and then I got my little flashlight out, and I'm looking at my Prick 112 Bravo, and I'm reading it. Step 1, turn the radio on. Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Step 2, put the antenna up. I mean, I'm reading that. That's where I am mentally, is just reading those steps, right, going through that stuff. Gordo and I were separated by quite a bit. We didn't see each other at all. I had come down so fast. We figured out later by some plots that we were about a half mile apart. We ejected at 20,000 feet and drifted pretty far apart. So I wasn't talking to him. I didn't even really turn on the radio part to listen. I didn't turn up the volume or any of that kind of stuff. So Gordo's off on his own, coordinating our rescue. I don't hear any of this stuff going on because I'm just lizard brain. So I've been on the ground about an hour and a half, nothing going on. I don't know. I can't hear anything. And then about an hour in, I hear some A-10s fly over. And from my FAC-A training days as a JTAC on the ground with the Marines, I was like, I know what that sound is. That's good. That means the good guys are overhead. So I'm like, okay, this is working here. They know we ejected, obviously, and they kind of know where we are. So I don't hear anything going on. And then it's like, what's going on? Kind of confused a little bit, still a little bit dazed and confused. I had a Camelback, so I'm drinking water because I figured I was probably in shock. And then about 2 hours into this whole thing, I start hearing this boop, 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 boop. And I'm like, oh, thank God. Because I knew that the Iraqis weren't flying helicopters, because anything that was flying, we were shooting it down, right? So they didn't have any capability out there. So I'm like, those are our guys, and as a fighter guy, we always talk about, jet noise, the sound of freedom, and whenever I talk to the helo guys, I'm like, you know what the sound of freedom is? It's those helicopter blades coming to get you. They eat that stuff up. So, so and I believe it. To me, to this day, that is the sound of freedom. So it was the guys from the 66th out at Nellis with the PJs were coming to get us. My helicopter pilot is a guy named Toof Hicks. So long story, I ended up at one point surprising him at his retirement ceremony. One of the guys tracked me down, and I showed up for that, which was awesome. So Toof and I have kept in touch, which is pretty cool. But anyway, so here I am on the ground, start hearing this. Gordo has coordinated this rescue, all this stuff. They're coming to get Gordo. They haven't talked to the pilot at all. They don't even know I'm alive. Nothing's going on. No transmissions, because I'm still in La La Land, honestly. So Gordo's done all this fantastic work. They're going to pick him up. And then as part of my survival kit, I had a Firefly, if you're familiar with that. So it's a little like a IR strobe that goes on a 9-volt. And, I was in shock. I knew it. I was a lifeguard at the beach in Virginia Beach when I was a kid. So I had some, first aid training and all this kind of stuff. And so I was like, I know what the signs of shock are, and I'm in it. So I need to hydrate. I'm freezing. So I had a wool hat in my G suit. So I put my wool hat on to try and and then wrap my parachute around me. And so they're going to rescue Gordo. I break out with the Firefly. Boom. And then all of a sudden, they come and pick me up first, right? And so what I can remember is looking behind me, seeing the helicopter land. There was rocks and stuff all in the desert. So people think of the desert. They think, oh, it's the sand. It's like going down to, Virginia Beach, and it's this soft sand and all that. No. The desert out there where we had ejected in the kind of the western Anbar province is go out to your street, the pavement, throw a little bit of sand on there and throw some rocks. That's what we landed on. It was just rock hard. Nowhere to hide, nowhere to evade. And this was the middle of the night. So if the sun had come up, we were out in the middle of nowhere. We didn't know at the time. Later, we got briefed that, there was an Iraqi garrison like 5 clicks away. So not that far. So we probably would have been POWs if the sun had come up. So thank God for the Air Force guys, and Toof and his boys coming to get us, came and picked us up. But Gordo and I, like I said, were separated. They came to get me first. I look back over my shoulder. All the rocks and stuff, I can still see it to this day, are hitting off the helo blade, so it's got like this blue glow. And then I see the PJs get out. They ask me a few questions and then put me in the helicopter. So we're flying around, and finally I hit one of the guys on the hip. I'm like, hey, what's going on? What are we doing? And they're like, we can't find the pilot. And I'm like, I'm the pilot. And so there was some confusion because Gordo had coordinated the whole rescue. They thought they had picked him up. Because I'd heard the helicopters, turned on my Firefly. So then they picked me up. And so then eventually they get eyes on Gordo and pick him up. And then we end up flying across the border together. And then one of the crazy things too is as we're flying in the helicopter across the border, when the Army had gone through Western Iraq, it's kind of the old island hopping campaign. So there were still visual observers and all kinds of stuff out there. I asked Toof later about this. I'm like, hey, we were in that helicopter and we're flying back. I thought I saw a bunch of tracers coming at the helicopter. And he's like, oh, yeah. So I almost had a bad day twice, Luckily, the helicopter was all blacked out, and all these tracers are just ripping by the helicopter. They're shooting at the noise, I'm like, holy cow. So, yeah, and then we get back. And get settled in. So pretty crazy. So that's my one up you in the bar story. Yeah. If I ever have to tell a story. So.
I think it one ups pretty much all of it. That's wild. Just
yeah.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what that would be like. And you answered the question obviously with the third knockout, but I was just thinking like how dark it is. They tell you eyes on the horizon, but if you can't see the ground, you don't know when you're going to hit, and everything obviously you described there with your candle in the corner of the room is about your best case. Not where you want to be.
No. And I have a picture. It's funny, when we got back to the base we were going to with the helo guys, I have a picture. I don't think I sent that to you or not, but I have a picture of us, with my arms around those two guys, and I keep that picture in my office, and I have my whole career, because I'm like, if I ever think I'm having a bad day, I just look over at that picture and I'm like, nope, everything is relative, right? So most things are pretty fixable compared to that. So
valid. Were you the first aircraft to go down in that campaign? I can't remember. There was
I think there was a tornado crew that went down. I know there was a Strike Eagle that gone down, and I knew the Wizzo from that Strike Eagle was a guy, Salty Watkins, and he had been an F-14 guy, so he went down a couple days before us in downtown, and they lost a crew there. So that was a rough one on us, knowing that. I know there was a F-18 off the Kitty Hawk that had gone down. So there were a few, that had gone down. I think we were the rescue though. I think the other ones were no rescue, so fatal kind of thing. So
unforgiving business. Glad it worked out for you. Did you go home after that, I assume?
I did. Yeah. So I got I flew home after that. So the crazy thing is go from because I wasn't part of the squadron, right? I was, like I talked about, I was a Tomcat grad working at the weapons school that was basically sent over to augment for some of those missions. I was sent home after that, so it was very bizarre, and I look back on it now hard, and I think about it. I was flying combat missions and all that and ejected, and 5 days later I'm sitting in my living room. So how do you deal with that? I think I just kind of blocked it out. I mean, honestly, I think that's what you do, and then you got to come to grips with all that stuff years later. But yeah, so it was difficult.
Well, I know in that time frame too, they weren't doing, obviously just kicked off. I think I did the maybe 2009, 2010 time frame is when like the DoD started mandating like pre-deployment testing where you do the cognitive tests. And,
right.
Then you had a baseline, but obviously you didn't have that comparison.
No.
But I imagine getting knocked in the head 3 times.
And I didn't report any of that because as a standard fighter guy, I'm like, if I tell them all this stuff happened, then they're not going to let me fly anymore. And that's the most important thing to me, is I got to go fly these jets still. So, but I've had some TBI testing and stuff like that since. My wife will tell you, he's, probably got issues, but it's kind of funny.
Yeah, well, that's all wives will, Like,
that's what I mean. That's what I mean. It wouldn't matter if I had TBI. She would just say I have issues, probably. But
it all makes sense. So come back from that. You stay in the Tomcat for a little while longer before transition to Hornet.
I did.
Right?
Yeah. So that was kind of interesting because I came back. I didn't fly for a while, and so they put us through what we call in the Navy a field naval aviator evaluation board. Normally for a combat loss, they don't do that. I was really mad at the time that they had put up, Gordo and I had to kind of go through that process. I was just so frustrated. And I think some of it was because we had just gone through this, obviously harrowing ordeal, and they put us through that. I look back on it in hindsight now, I think the leadership of the Navy was spot on to do it because it was an investigation. It gave us some time out of the cockpit, honestly, to heal mentally and physically, to go through that. And it was also a thorough investigation just so that our records were cleared. And so for the rest of our careers, we didn't have, there was never any second guessing any of that stuff. So I had finished up, basically that was the end of my weapons school tour. And so then I was going back to what we call a fleet squadron, deployable squadron. And so I at that point, went to another F-14 squadron. They were still around. I went to VF-32, the swordsman of VF-32, as the training officer, and flew with them. At the time, the commanding officer was a Rio, and so not too long after, it was like 2005, I guess. So this was April of 2003, 2004, 5 time frame. Deploy again back to Iraq with the swordsman, and our first, the carrier pulls in the Persian Gulf, and then our first sortie, basically off the aircraft carrier as an air wing. My commanding officer at the time was the flight lead for that, and I was his pilot as the weapons school training officer. Generally, you flew with the commanding officer if it was a good crew pair, one pilot, one Wizzo, reverse, whatever it was. And so I was the skipper's pilot, and we flew right back over Western Anbar province and all that stuff. So in hindsight, that was probably the hardest thing I ever did in an airplane, was having to climb back in that airplane on the flight deck at night, knowing I was going right back. Now, obviously, the war was a lot different in that time frame. It wasn't, the surface-to-air threat and all those kind of things that we had in 03, but still mentally, that was a big hurdle to get over, to go fly with him. And I thank him for that, for getting me to do that, get back on the horse, because it would have been in the back of my mind the whole time. So it was good to go back and fly kind of right back in that same spot. And I'm like, okay. And then after that one, I was fine. But yeah, that was a difficult climbing up the ladder that day for sure.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. What was your wife's thoughts?
I mean, she was when I got home, and we had a long talk, and I was just like, I'd like to fly again, but this is a decision for us to make together. And she knew how much it meant to me, and so she was like, do it. I think she knew that for me, mentally, for the rest of my life, if that was the last flight I'd ever done, it would have been there always, as something I would regret that I didn't go back and, climb back on the horse. So I think for her, God bless her, knew that I needed to do it. And so we did. And then I had a full career after that. So did that deployment, and Tomcats, came back, did your standard, staff tours, which are brutal. Was selected to command a squadron. Actually went right back to the swordsman of 32, which was awesome. But at this time, they were VFA, so Super Hornets. So kind of like, Tom Cruise in the Top Gun movies, Tomcat guy to Super Hornet guy. That's me. And so I commanded a F-18 squadron, and then I deployed as the executive officer in that squadron before I took command. Went to Afghanistan, so that was my first time flying over in Afghanistan. So I was fortunate enough to fly combat missions in both the Tomcat and in the Super Hornet. And then I finished up that command tour, staff tours at the Pentagon. You know how that stuff standard works. And then I was fortunate enough to get selected for Major Command, and came back right to my home base of Oceana and was the commanding officer there. And that's where I finished up my career, which was awesome. And as part of my speech there when I took command, and the same thing when I left, is my dad flew out of there, so it's for a time period of about 46 years on and off. There was a Vincelette flying out of Oceana, which is pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, that's really cool. Doing the command piece, is there one particular highlight that you can think back on, and then one particular really tough thing you had to deal with as a commander?
I would say for me, being the commander, 05 level commands at the Gypsies, to me was the best thing was really the people. I always say I joined the Navy as a selfish 18-year-old going through ROTC and to go to flight school to fly jets, and I stayed because of the people. And to me, being the commanding officer at that level, that 05 level, that's really your chance to get to know everybody really well. I mean, you know all your sailors, you know all your air crew, your ready room's really tight. And so I don't know that there's one specific incident there that I can point out, or incident. To me, it was just the overall experience of being able to be, make decisions that affected people's lives, but being a mentor to all those young sailors and the young officers in the squadron, to me was to me probably the most remarkable thing. Is what I loved most about that.
What was one of the toughest things you had to deal with?
And then I would say the hardest thing I had to deal with as is when I was the executive officer at Oceana. We actually had a major fuel spill where we lost 90,000 gallons of jet fuel spilled. Fortunately, it wasn't somebody under our direct command, because we probably would have lost our jobs over that. It was a tenant command that was in charge of that. But 90,000 pounds of jet fuel spilled due to some negligence. Spilled out into the community of Virginia Beach. We were able to contain it, which was good. It was very impactful, obviously, for the people that lived around the base. I felt terrible for them because they're living with these jet fume smells and those kind of things. The Navy, we evacuated them out, put them up in hotels in Virginia Beach and that kind of thing. But the biggest lesson I learned from that was just about relationships, and I learned that from my mentors earlier in the Navy is, build relationships early so that when you need them, they're there and you're not trying to build them. So we talked Small World before. So fortunately, at Oceana, my fire chief for our fire department, Ken Snyder, he and I had graduated high school together because I was a local, right? Remember? Same class, same high school. He was the fire chief. And then the fire department head of hazmat was also a classmate of ours for the Virginia Beach Fire Department. And so because fire community is very small, kind of like the fighter community in the Navy, the Air Force, and the military at large, I would say, Ken was very good friends with him. And so when this fuel spill happened, Ken got on the phone directly to him. Fortunately, where the fuel spill was going down all these ditches, and it would have gone probably in to the Lynnhaven River into the Chesapeake Bay. You would have been all over the national news. But due to the power of relationships, Ken called the Virginia Beach Fire Department. They got booms laid out across where we thought the fuel was going to come out, stopped it all, and all that kind of stuff. So as terrible as that was, it was a month of my life that I'll never forget, with the cleanup and trying to take care of the citizens of Virginia Beach and work through those things. It really showed me the power of relationships. The Coast Guard came out and helped us. The EPA was there, and we worked as a team. So it's kind of the old, turn a negative into a positive, at least on that side.
It's probably one of those things you didn't think as a lieutenant or ensign you would have to be dealing with. No. You just wanted to fly fast jets.
Exactly. Fortunately, as a skipper of the base, I still got to fly, I flew with the training squadron, VFA 106, the Gladiators, and they were fantastic about, I would just say, here's some openings that I have. If it fits into your schedule, I'd love to go fly. And so, I got to still do that as a colonel, or Navy captain, as we call it, and which was just awesome. Loved it.
Well, looking back on everything, I hope, one, you'll stay around for a There Was story, but before we part ways, if you found, I guess, Ensign Vinny walking down the street, is there a piece of advice you would give him, tell him to do something different? Would you change something?
I don't think I would change a thing. I would just say, trust the system and chase your dreams, because if you work hard and put in the work, you can make it happen.
Awesome. Well, sir, thanks for joining me. Pleasure talking to you. And
thanks,
really
Rain. Appreciate it. Enjoyed it.
Absolutely. I'll talk to you here in just a second for There I Was.
Okay, sounds good. Perfect.
15,000 RVs in the